Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory and you are on the Varietal Literature YouTube page. Varietal Literature is a group of writers from Vancouver who like to have fun with narrative. Tonight we're going to be reading old folk and fairy tales. If you've never been here before, then welcome. And usually we read about 3 stories, sometimes lots of little short ones, and sometimes even one really long one, though that's less common. Tonight we're going to be reading stuff that was collected by Yeats, the Irish poet. We're going to be reading what are called folk tales, really, and then we're going to read some specifically from his Irish fairy tale book, which is usually sold together now, but was originally a separate book. GS says, good evening. I didn't know Ireland had a demon cat. They also have a cat king, which we'll read about today. So we're going to read 3 stories today. The first story is going to be about the demon cat, which is a relatively short story and amounts to a bit of it's a story, but it's sort of on an anecdote level. And then the second story we're going to read is about a bard named Seanchan who upsets the king of cats. Now, the third story I actually have not decided on, so I have 2 options, and we'll see where we're at with time and which one I think about will suit this best. There's one that is explicitly about cats in Ireland, but it's only one section of what is a relatively long story for the kind of format we're doing here. It wouldn't be long for you to read, but it would be long to be read. And it is gruesomely violent, which is a little bit odd also because the other third story that we might be reading is also pretty violent, but in a less obviously gruesome way, I guess. I don't know, it's still pretty gruesome, but it is not about cats. It's about saints, because originally I was going to talk about saints, which have a lot of mythology around them in Ireland. Obviously St. Patrick being the most famous one, and we're coming up on St. Patrick's Day. And I decided that I wanted to talk about cats more. But since we are coming up on St. Patrick's Day, I thought I would share just a little bit about St. Patrick and sort of explain why I'm not really going to tell tales of St. Patrick's here. It'll take me like 2 minutes, and then we'll get on to the demon cat and the king of cats and whatever our third story is going to be. So the St. Patrick is a real person. He's recorded in what's called the Irish Annals. Annals, I'm sure you've heard annals of history. Annals are essentially big books of major events, usually feasting days and whatever else, but major events that monks kept that are very useful for knowing when things happened. And one of the things they tracked was the death of people in their order and people, religious people in their area, and St. Patrick was amongst those people. So he's in the Irish Annals, which makes it incredibly likely that he existed. There's very little doubt that he really existed, and that indeed he did do things. His fundamental story, as he tells it in his confessions, is that he was kidnapped by Irish pirates. He was taken to Ireland for 6 years where he served as a slave, essentially. No, not essentially, literally. Raising cattle, if I recall. And then God spoke to him. He found a boat that took him away. I think he went to France or something like that. And he encountered the monasteries there. I'm probably blending this up a bit. Anyways, the point is eventually he became a priest. And he went back to Ireland, and he is the person who's credited with Christianizing Ireland in the 5th century. 4th to 5th century, I think it is, or 5th to 6th century. So very old. That's like 500 AD if you're keeping track of things here. Things that he has been, stories that exist about him. There's numerous stories that exist about him, but the ones worth noting that are the biggest ones is he used the shamrock to explain the Trinity to Irish pagans. which is why he's shown carrying a shamrock, and on St. Patrick's Day he carries around a shamrock. The other thing that St. Patrick's is accredited with is chasing all the snakes, or at least venomous snakes, but snakes, off of Ireland. Now, just as a note, he's not the only person who is credited with doing that. He's just probably the most famous and lasting one to be credited that way. And also, archaeological record says it doesn't look like there was ever snakes in Ireland, but it's neither here nor there. We talked a couple of weeks ago when we read from this book before that St. Patrick was said to have built a chapel on top of Patrick, of which there is archaeological evidence dating back to that time that such a structure was there, so that seems likely to be true, which would have been quite the feat. Those are the main things. There's a bunch of other things he's credited with. Talking to Sean, and who is a figure we've talked about before. So if you're curious, if you came here to find out St. Patrick's, because you're a regular viewer and we're in the week of St. Patrick's Day, there's a little quick primer on St. Patrick's. We're not really going to talk about St. Patrick's here because of two reasons. First of all, basically, if you had an idea for a story or a legend that you wanted to reinterpret in some way, you would recast it with St. Patrick's. So as a result, it's pretty hard to tell what were originally legends associated to St. Patrick's and what were just later shifts because everyone wanted to say that St. Patrick's was in their story or their lore. As a result, there is innumerable amounts of work around St. Patrick's. I guess actually there's three reasons why I'm not doing it. The second reason is St. Patrick is a real figure, is a venerated saint, and that makes him harder to talk about in a setting like this, where we generally, even if a person is real, we generally accept that we're dealing with sort of lore versions of them and whatever else. It's trickier with St. Patrick. It's a lot more touchy and sensitive. And I'm not willing to tread on people's sincere beliefs. The final reason is that a lot of the original and primary works around St. Patrick's that are most reliably about St. Patrick's are, like most really old legends, all in rhyming Old English, Old Irish, Old Nordic. It's rhyme, and it's really hard for a modern viewer to make sense of it. So those books exist. If you want to read them, you can, but it's definitely something you have to get an ear for. And I don't think the average Canadian or American watching this really would get that much out of it, especially somebody like me reading it, considering it was catered around a very specific style of speaking that I don't do. Okay. But there's a little primer on St. Patrick's because we do deal with legends here. And if anybody is left, I'm shocked and amazed, to be honest. But if you've never heard it, the thing that probably was the most surprising to me when I was doing my research, I did not realize that the shamrock was very specifically associated to St. Patrick's and not just Ireland in general, although it is related to Ireland now, but it has specific associations to St. Patrick, and that's sort of how it becomes related to Ireland. But that's not why we're here. We're here for the demon cat of Ireland, if you're clicked on the title. I probably should have said this earlier, but if you want to skip around and you're not watching this live, there's always timestamps in the description. Click to where you want to go. It will take you to the beginning of each story that we're reading, so if you're only interested in certain things, click on that. So the first story we're going to read is the one that is the point of our icon, the Demon Cat of Ireland. It's a short story, a very short story, I think the less said the better, about a demon cat. So this is the Demon Cat, collected from Lady Wilde by W.B. Yeats in the Fairy and Folktales of Irish Peasantry. There was a woman in Connemara, the wife of a fisherman. As he had always good luck, she had plenty of fish at all times stored away in the house, ready for market. But to her great annoyance, she found that a great cat used to come in at night, devour all her best and finest fish. So she kept a big stick by her and determined to watch. One day, as she and a woman were spinning together, the house suddenly became quite dark. The door was burst open as if by the blast of the tempest, when in walking a huge black cat who went straight up to the fire, then turned around and growled at them. "Why, surely this is the devil," said a young girl who was by sorting fish. "I'll teach you to call me names," said the cat. And jumping at her, he scratched at her till the blood came. "There now," he said, "you will be more civil when our gentleman comes to see you." And with that, he walked over to the door and shut it close, preventing any of them from going out. For the poor young girl, while crying loudly from fright and pain, had made a desperate rush to get away. Just then a man was going by, and hearing the cries, he pushed open the door and tried to get in, but the cat stood on the threshold and would let no one pass. On this, the man attacked him with his stick and gave him a sound blow. The cat, however, was more than a match in the fight, for it flew at him and tore his face and hands so badly that the man at last took to his heels and ran away as fast as he could. "Now it's time for my dinner," said the cat, going up to examine the fish that was laid out on the tables. "I hope the fish is good today. Now don't disturb me nor make a fuss. I can help myself." And with that he jumped up and began to devour all the best fish while he growled at the woman. "Away! Away! Out of this, you wicked beast!" she cried, giving it a blow with the tongs that would have broken its back. Only it was a devil. "Out of this! No fish shall you have today!" But the cat only grinned at her and went on tearing and spoiling and devouring the fish, evidently not a bit worse for the blow. On this, both the women attacked with their sticks and struck hard blows, enough to kill it, on which the cat glared at them and spit fire. Then, making a leap, it tore their heads and arms till the blood came, and the frightened woman rushed shrieking from the house. But presently the mistress returned, carrying with her a bottle of holy water. And looking in, she saw the cat was still devouring the fish and not minding. So she crept over quietly and threw holy water on it without a word. No sooner was this done than a dense black smoke filled the place, through which nothing was seen but the two red eyes of the cat, burning like coals of fire. Then the smoke gradually cleared away, and she saw the body of the creature burning slowly till it became shriveled and black like a cinder, and finally disappeared. And from that time the fish remained untouched and safe from harm, for the power of the evil one was broken and the demon cat was seen no more. That was the demon cat. Like I said, a short one. All right. GS makes an interesting observation, says basically that's an exorcism, and that I think is probably an accurate observation, if I think about it. All right. Now, this next one was an... Ooh. This next one is one of those situations where I looked up how to pronounce this name, and I could find... This is a tricky thing about Yeats's book. I could find pronunciations of words from Gaelic and so on that were similar in spelling, but not exactly the same. And it's tough because this name in particular is featured in the Wheel of Time series, which is a fantasy series, where it's pronounced Seanchan, But if I could be wrong about this, but if I remember correctly, that's not exactly how this would be pronounced in the Gaelic that I've seen. I think that's more just using the same name in a more anglicized way. The tricky thing with Yeats, though, is sometimes these texts are sometimes things he's been sent or collected from people, and sometimes he anglicizes the Irish words, and sometimes he doesn't. And sometimes it mixes in the same stories. So, like, he won't anglicize, and by anglicize I mean write it in the way that would get a close pronunciation to what the word is in English. Like Connacht. I mean, I think in English, if you pronounced it the way it's spelled in Gaelic, it would be like Connacht. But he doesn't spell that differently. So you just kind of have to know how it's pronounced. But then he'll also do, at times, a change on words where it's not the spelling in Gaelic, it's the anglicized version, so you could pronounce it pretty close to how it was pronounced. All I'm trying to say here is how to pronounce the bard's name. I didn't find a definitive source. Piecing together what I did find, it seems like it might be Seanchan or Seanchan, which sounds pretty similar to me, but they were slightly different. Sort of like a Sean with a longer on. As a result, at times I might just say Sean. Because Sean is absolutely an Irish name. So this is called Sean the Bard and the King of the Cats by Lady Wilde again. And this is from actually a slightly different book. Still by Yeats, called Irish Fairytales. Then Seanchan, the renowned bard, was made Ardfile, or chief poet of Ireland. Gwar, the king of Connacht, to do him honour, made a great feast for him and the whole bardic association. And all the professors and learned men went to the king's house, and great loves of poetry and history and music and of the arts and sciences, and the learned, aged females, Grug and Gaig and Granget, and all the chief poets and poetesses of Ireland, in amazing number, but Gwar, the king, entertained them all splendidly, so that an ancient pathway to his palace is still called the Road of the Dishes. And each day he asked, "How fares it with my noble guests?" But they were all discontented and wanted things he could not get for them. So he was very sorrowful and prayed to God to be delivered from the learned men and women, a vexatious class. Still, the feast went on for 3 days and 3 nights, and they drank and made merry, and the whole bardic association entertained the nobles with the choicest music and professional accomplishments. But Seanchan sulked and would neither eat nor drink, for he was jealous of the nobles of Connacht. And when he saw how much they consumed of the best meats and wine, he declared he would taste no food till they and their servants were all sent away out of the house. And when Gwar asked him again, "How fares my noble guests, and this great, excellent people?" Seanchan answered, "I've never had worse days, nor worse nights, nor worse dinners in my life." And he ate nothing for 3 whole days. Then the king was sorely grieved, that the whole bardic association should be feasting and drinking, while Seanchan, the chief poet of Erin, was fasting and weak. So he sent his favorite serving man, a person of mild manners and cleanliness, to offer special dishes to the bard. "Take 'em away," said Seanchan. "I'll have none of 'em." "And why, O royal bard?" asked the servitor. "Because thou art an uncomely youth," answered Seanchan. "Thy grandfather was chip-nailed, and I've seen him. I shall eat no food from thy hands." Then the king called a beautiful maiden to him, his foster daughter, and said, "Lady, Bring thou this wheaten cake and this dish of salmon to the illustrious poet, and serve him thyself. So the maiden went. But when Seanchan saw her, he asked, Who sent thee hither? And why hast thou brought me food? My lord, the king sent me, O royal bard, she answered, because I am comely to look upon, and he bade me serve thee with food myself. Take it away, said Seanchan. Thou art an unseemly girl. I know none more ugly. I've seen thy grandmother. She sat on a wall one day and pointed out the way with her hand to some travelling lepers. How could I touch thy food? So the maiden went away. In sorrow. And then Gwr the king was indeed angry, and he exclaimed, My malediction on the mouth that uttered that. May the kiss of a leper be on Seanchan's lips before he dies. Now, there was a young serving girl there, and she said to Seanchan, There is a hen's egg in the place, my lord. May I bring it to thee, O chief bard? It will suffice, said Seanchan. Bring it that I may eat. But when she went to look for it, behold, the egg was gone. Thou hast eaten it, said the bard in wrath. Not so, my lord, she answered, but the mice, the nimble race, have carried it away. Then I will satirize them in a poem, said Seanchan, and forthwith he chanted so bitter a satire against them that 10 mice fell dead at once in his presence. "'Tis well," said Seanchan, "but the cat is the one most to blame, for it was her duty to suppress the mice. Therefore I shall satirize the tribe of the cats, and their chief lord Urson, son of Arson, for I know where he lives with his wife Spitfire and his daughter Sharptooth, with her brothers the Purr and the Growler. But I shall begin with Urson himself, for he is king and answerable for all the cats." And he said, "Urson, monster of the claws, who strikes at the mouse but lets it go, the weakest of the cats? The otter did well to bit off the tips of thy progenitor's ears, so that every cat since is jagged-eared. Let thy tail hang down, it is right for the mouse jeers at thee." Now, Urson, king of the cats, heard these words in his cave, and he said to his daughter Sharptooth, "Seanchan has satirized me, but I will be avenged." "Nay, father," she said, "bring him here alive, that we may all take our revenge." "I shall go then, and bring him back," said Urson, "so send thy brothers after me." Now when it was told to Seanchan that the king of the cats was on his way to come and kill him, he was timorous, and besought Gwr and all the nobles to stand by and protect him. And before long a vibrating, impressive, impetuous sound was heard, like a raging tempest of a fire in full blaze. When the cat appeared, he seemed to them the size of a bullock, and this was his appearance: rapacious, panting, jagged-eared, snub-nosed, sharp-toothed, nimble, angry, vindictive, glare-eyed, terrible, sharp-clawed. Such was his similitude. But he passed on amongst them, not minding till he came to Seanchan, and he seized him by the arm and jerked him up on his back and made off the way he came before anyone could touch him, for he had no other object in view but to get hold of the poet that had satirized him. Now, Seanchan, being in evil plight, had recourse to flattery. "Oh, Urson," he exclaimed, "how truly splendid thou art! Such running, such leaps, such strength, and such agility! But what evil have I done, O Urson, son of Arson? Spare me, I entreat. I invoke the saints between thee and me, O great king of the cats." But not a bit did the cat let go his hold for all this fine talk, but went straight to Clon MacNoise, where there was a forge, and St. Kieran happened to be standing there at the door. "What? exclaimed the saint. "Is that the chief bard of Erin on the back of a cat? Has Gwair's hospitality ended in this?" And he ran for a red-hot bar of iron that was in the furnace, and struck the cat on the side with it so that the iron passed through him, and it fell down lifeless. "Now my curse on the hand that gave me that blow," said the bard when he got upon his feet. "And wherefore?" asked St. Kieran. "Because," answered Seanchan, "I'd rather Urson had killed me and eaten me every bit, that so I might bring disgrace on Gwair for the bad food he gave me, and for it was all owing to his wretched dinners that I got into this plight." And when all the other kings heard of Seanchan's misfortunes, they sent to beg he would visit their courts. But he would have neither kiss nor welcome from them, and went on his way to the bardic mansion, where the best of good living was to be had. And ever after, kings were afraid to offend Seanchan. So as long as he lived, he had the chief place at the feast, and all the nobles were made to sit below him, and Seanchan was content. And in time he and Gwair were reconciled, and Seanchan and all the Olaves, and the whole bardic association were feasted by the king for 30 days in noble style, and had the choicest of viands and the best of French wines to drink, served in goblets of silver. And in return for his splendid hospitality, the Bardic Association decreed unanimously a vote of thanks to the king, and they praised him in poems as Gwair the Generous, by which name he was ever known in history, for the words of the poet are immortal. Now you might be wondering, what was that story about? I don't know, but I can identify some themes. The first was that kind of moral neutrality compared to maybe modern terms, or I guess sort of different morality, but he's a head of the Bardic Association, so he's of high status and should be given the best service. Like that kind of hierarchical thing is not as odd as it might seem to us now. He might seem kind of stuck up and be thankful for what you get, man. The other thing though is really in that last line, which is, I think the story is trying to show how this bard can basically ruin a king by putting out stories that people will share and remember long past whatever it is the king tries to do to fix it. I think that's interesting. Okay, which means we are looking at our last story. So the question is, do you want to read a story about a saint that is truly unexpected in the end? The first 3/4 of it I don't think is that unexpected, but the ending is quite the twist. Or chat, are you interested in hearing a longer story about two brothers doing brutal things to each other? Of which cats make a small appearance. But it is longer. And if I get no specific opinions, by the way, I will probably... Oh, God. I'll probably flip a coin, to be honest. I mean, I guess I did promise cats. So maybe I should read the one that has cats in it. Yeah, we'll do that. Okay, so... Here's my warning about this. This involves some gruesome violence. Like a lot of folk and fairy tales, though, it meets with a little serious consequence. So if you're the kind of person who gets stressed out that something very dark has happened, understand that in most fairy tales, with some exceptions, unless it's at the very end, these things are reversed or tempered in some way. That said, I've never presented this as a show for kids. I would say this is probably not a story for kids. This is, I think, an entertaining story, but a violent one and a dark one. So you make your own choices here. This is called Owney and Owney-na-peak. Now, one other thing. I'm a person who has a tough time with names. The brothers are named Owney and Owney-na-peak. And man, it is not straightforward to keep them who's who. They act differently, but not always enough to remember who's who. So try and pay attention to that early on so you get a sense of which brother is which. And yeah, this is a longer story, so this will definitely take us out to the end. I think it's like 12 pages, and usually our long stories are about 7, so it's going to be long. This is Owney and Owney-na-peak from Irish Fairy Tales, collected from Gerald Griffin by W.B. Yeats. When Ireland had kings of her own, when there was no such thing as a coat made of red cloth in the country. If you don't know that reference, that's the British. When there was plenty in men's houses, and peace and quietness at men's door, and that is a long time since, there lived in a village not far from the great city of Limerick, which is Limerick now. Limerick is obviously a style of poetry, but there's a city called Limerick. 2 young men, cousins, one of them named Owney, a smart, kind-hearted, handsome youth with limb of a delicate form and a very good understanding. His cousin's name was Owney too, and the neighbors christened him Owney-na-peak, or Owney of the Nose, on account of the long nose he had got, a thing so out of all proportion that after looking at one side of his face, it was a smart morning's walk to get round the nose and take a view of the other. At least so people used to say. It's just a little context before I move on. This story is referencing a time before the famines and various types of persecution that the Irish had faced under British rule. So that intro is referencing it, and the story itself is obviously connected to that idea. Now, the story itself doesn't address that, but at least not directly. It is framing itself that way, probably for a reason. Keep that in mind. He was a stout, able-bodied fellow, as stupid as a beaten hound, and he was, moreover, a cruel tyrant to his young cousin, with whom he lived in a kind of partnership. Both of them were of a humble station. They were smiths, whitesmiths, and they got a good deal of business to do from the lord of the courts, and the knights, and all the grand people of the city. But one day Owney was in town. He saw a great procession of lords and ladies and generals and great people, among whom was the king's daughter of the court. Surely it is not possible for the young rose itself to be so beautiful as she was. His heart fainted at her sight, and he went home desperately in love and not at all disposed to business. Money, he was told, was the surest way of getting acquainted with the king. So he began saving until he put together a few hogs. But Owney-na-peak, finding that where he had hid them, seized on the whole, as he is used to do on all young Owney's earnings. One evening, young Owney's mother found herself about to die, so she called her son to her bedside and said to him, "You've been most dutiful, good son. 'Tis proper you should be rewarded for it. Take this china cup to the fair. There is a fairy gift upon it. Use your wit, look about you, and let the highest bidder have it. And so, my white-headed boy, God bless you." White-headed boy is a idiosyncratic thing, according to the footnotes, in Irish culture, meaning favored child. The young man drew the little bed curtain over his dead mother, and in a few days after, with a heavy heart, he took his china cup and set off to the fair of Gerald. The place was merry enough. The field that is called the Gallows Green now was covered with tents. There was plenty of wine, poteen not being known in these days, let alone Parliament. A great many handsome girls, and 'tis unknown all the kyo that was with the boys themselves. Sorry, I lost my place there. Poor Owney walked all the day through the fair, wishing to try his luck, but ashamed to offer his china cup among all the fine things that were there for sale. Evening was drawing on at last, and he was thinking of going home when a strange man tapped him on the shoulder and said, "My good youth, I've been marking you through the fair the whole day, going about with that cup in your hand, speaking to nobody and looking as if you want to be wanting something or another." "I'm for selling it," said Owney. "What is it you're selling, you say?" said a second man, coming up and looking at the cup. "Why, then," said the first man, "and what's that to you, for a prying meddler? What do you want to know what it is he's selling? Bad manners, you, and where's the use of my wishing you what you have already? Haven't I a right to ask the price of what's in the fair?" "Ethan, the knowledge of the price is all you'll have for it," says the first. "Here, my lad, is a golden piece for your cup." "That cup shall never hold drink or diet in your house, please heaven," says the second. "Here's 2 gold pieces for the cup, lad." "Why, then, see this now. If I was forced to fill it to the rim with gold before I could call it mine, you shall never hold that cup between your fingers. Here, boy, do you mind me? Give me that once and for all. Here's 10 gold pieces for it. Say no more." 10 gold pieces for a china cup," said a great lord of the court who just rode up at that moment. "It must surely be a valuable article. Here, boy, here are 20 pieces for it. Give it to my servant." "Give it to mine," cried another lord of the party, "and here's my purse, where you'll find 10 more, and if any man offers another fraction for it to outbid that, I'll spit him on my sword like a snipe." "I outbid him," said a fair young lady in a veil by his side, flinging 20 gold pieces more on the ground. There was no voice to outbid the lady, and young Owney, kneeling, gave the cup into her hands. 50 gold pieces for a china cup, said Owney to himself as he plodded on home. That's what's not worth 2. Ah, mother, you knew that vanity had in open hand. But as he drew near home, he determined to hide his money somewhere, knowing, as well as he did, that his cousin would not leave him a single cross to bless himself with. So he dug a little pit and buried all but 2 pieces, which he brought to the house. His cousin, knowing the business on which he had gone, laughed heartily when he saw him enter, and asked him what luck he got with his punch bowl. Not so bad, neither. 2 pieces of gold is not a bad price for an article of old china. 2 gold pieces, Owney, honey. Let us see 'em. Maybe you would. He took the cash from Owney's hand, and after opening his eyes in great astonishment at the sight of so much money, put them in his pocket. Well, Owney, I'll keep 'em safe for you, in my pocket within. But tell us, maybe you would, how come you to get such a mort of money for an old cup painted shiny that wasn't worth maybe a penny a bit? Ollie's house says supply and demand and bored rich white people priceless. True. To get into the heart of the fair, then, free and easy, and to look about me, and to cry old china, and the first man that come up, he asked to me, what is it I be asking for the cup? And I say out bold, 100 pieces of gold. And he too laugh hearty, and we two huckster together, till he beat me down to 2. And there's the whole way of it all. In other words, he asked for a very high price. In other words, he's lying to his brother. Owney-na-peak made as if he took no note of this, but next morning early he took an old china saucer he had in his cupboard, and off he set, without saying a word to anybody, to the fair. You may easily imagine that it created no small surprise in the place when they heard a great big fellow with a china saucer in his hand crying out, "A real Chinese saucer, going for 100 pieces of gold. Real Chinese, who'll be buying?" "What are you saying, you great gomerel?" says a man coming up to him and looking first at the saucer and then in his face. "Is it thinking anybody would go make a muffin of it himself to give it like that for that saucer?" But Owney-na-peak had no answer to make, only to cry out, "Real Chinese, 100 pieces of gold!" And soon a crowd collected about him, and finding he would give no account of himself, they fell upon him, beat him within an inch of his life, and after having satisfied themselves upon him, they went their way laughing and shouting. Towards sunset he got up and crawled towards home as well as he could without cup or money. Soon as Owney saw him, he helped him into the forge, looking very mournful, although, if truth must be told, it was to revenge himself for former good deeds of his cousin that he'd set him about this foolish business. "Come here, Owney-na-peak," said his cousin, after he fastened the forge door and heated 2 irons into the fire. "You child of mischief," said he, and when he had caught him, "You shall never see the fruits of your roguery again, for I'll put out your eyes." And so saying, he snatched one of the red-hot irons from the fire, and it was all in vain for poor Owney to throw himself on his knees and ask mercy and beg and implore forgiveness. He was weak, and Owney-na-peak was strong. He held him fast and burned out both his eyes, I warned you. He then, taking while he was yet fainting from the pain upon his back, he carried him off to the bleak hill of Untitled, where a great distance, and there laid him under a tombstone, and went his ways. In a little time after, Owney came to himself. "Oh, sweet light of day! What is it to become of me now?" thought the poor lad, as he lay on his back under the tomb. "Is this to be the fruit of that unhappy present? Must I be dark for ever and ever? And I am never more to look upon that sweet countenance that even in my blindness is not entirely shut out from me." He would have said a great deal more in this way, and perhaps more pathetic still, but just then he heard a great meow, as if all the cats in the world were coming up the hill together in one faction. Meow. He gathered himself up and drew back under the stone, and remained quite still, expecting what would come next. In a very short time he heard all the cats about the yard, whisking over the tombstones and playing all sorts of pranks among the graves. He felt the tails of 1 or 2 brush his nose, and well for him it was that they did not discover him there, as he afterwards found out. At last, "Silence," said one of the cats, and they were all as mute as so many mice in an instant. "Now, all you cats of this great country, small and large, gray and red, yellow, black, brown, mottled, and white, attend to what I'm going to tell you, in the name of your king and the master of all the cats. The sun is down and the moon is up, and the night is silent, and no mortal hears us, and I may tell you a secret. You know the king of the monster's daughter?" Oh yes, and why wouldn't we? Go on with your story," said all the cats together. "I have heard of her, for one," said a little dirty-faced black cat, speaking after they had all done, "for I am the cat that sits upon the hob of Owney and Owney-na-peak, the whitesmiths, and I know many the time young Owney does be talking of her, when he sits by the fire alone, rubbing me down and planning how he can get into her father's court. Rest you natural, says the cat that was making the speech. Why do you think we care for your Owney or Owney-na-peak? Mother, thinks Owney to himself. Did anybody ever hear the equal of this? Well, gentlemen, says the cat again, what I have to say is this. The king was last week struck with blindness, and you all know well how and by what means any blindness may be cured. You know there is no disorder that can ail the mortal frame that may not be removed by praying round at the well of Barrygowan yonder. And the king's disorder is such that no other cure whatever can be had for it. Now, beware, don't let the secret pass one o'er your lips, for there's a great-grandson of Simon Magus, that is coming down to try his skill, and he is that must use the water and marry the princess, who is to be given to anyone so fortunate as to heal her father's eyes. And so on that day, gentlemen, we are all promised a feast of the fattest mice that ever walked the ground. This speech was wonderfully applauded by the cats, and presently after the whole crew scampered off, jumping and mewing and purring down the hill. Gia says, why do they love such grotesque violence? I imagine they'd seen a lot of grotesque violence, and that probably helps desensitize. So the cat leader has a deal with somebody who wants to marry the king's daughter, which Owney wants to marry. And that's why he was trying to get money in the first place. Normally I don't give little summaries like this, but I did find this story at times a little difficult to follow. Oh. I got onto a completely different section. This is weird. Let's get back to where we were. It's very strange. There we are. Owney, being sensible that they were all gone, came from his hiding place, and knowing the road to Barrygowan Well, which is where apparently the cure for blindness was, he set off and groped his way out, and shortly knew by the rolling of the waves, coming in from the point of Foynes, that he was near the place. He got to the well, and making a round like a good Christian, rubbed his eyes with the well water, looking up, saw day dawning in the east, so fixed his eyes. Giving thanks, he jumped up on his feet. And you may say that Owney-na-peak was much astonished on opening the door of the forge to find him there, his eyes as well or better than ever, and his face as merry as a dance. Well, cousin, said Owney, smiling, you've done me the greatest service that one man can do another. You put me in the way of getting 2 pieces of gold, said he, showing 2 he had taken from his hiding place. If you could only bear the pain of suffering me just to put out your eyes and lay you in the same place as you laid me, who knows what luck you'd have? No, there's no occasion for putting out eyes at all. But could you not lay me, just as I am tonight, in that place, and let me try my own fortune? If it be a thing you tell the truth. And what else could put the eyes in your head after I'd burning them out with irons? You'll know all this in time, said Owney, stopping him in his speech. For just that minute, Casting his eyes towards the hob, he saw the cat sitting upon it and looking very hard at him. So he made sign to Owney-na-peak to be silent and talk of something else, at which the cat turned away her eyes and began washing her face. Quite simple, with her 2 paws, looking now and then sideways into Owney's face, just like a Christian. By and by, when she had walked out of the forge, he shut the door after her and finished what he was going to say, which made Owney-na-peak still more anxious than before to be placed under the tombstone. Owney agreed to it very readily, and just as they were done speaking, cast a glance towards the forge window, where he saw the imp of a cat, just with her nose and one eye peeping in through a broken pane. He said nothing, however, but prepared to carry his cousin to the place, where towards nightfall he laid him as he had been laid himself, snug under the tombstone, and went his way down the hill, resting in Shanagolden that night, to see what would come of it in the morning. Owney-na-peak had not been more than 2 or 3 hours or so lying down, when he heard the very same noises coming up the hill that had puzzled Owney the night before. Seeing the cats enter the churchyard, he began to grow very uneasy, and strove to hide himself as well as he could, which was tolerably well too, all being covered by the tombstone, except in the part of the nose, which he was so long that he could not get it to fit by any means. You may say to yourself that he was not a little surprised when he saw the cats all assemble like a congregation going to hear mass, some sitting, some walking about, and other ones asking one another after the kittens and the like, and more of them stretching themselves upon the tombstones and waiting for the speech of their commander. Silence was proclaimed at length, and he spoke. "Now, all you cats of this great county, small and large, gray, red, yellow, black, brown, mottled, or white, attend." "Meow, stay, stay," said a little cat with a dirty face, that just then came running into the yard. "Be silent, for there are mortal ears listening to what you say. I've run hard and fast to say that your words were overheard last night. I am the cat that sits upon the hob of Owney and Owney-na-peak, and I saw a bottle of water of Barrygowan hanging up over the chimney this morning in their house." In an instant all the cats began screaming and meowing and flying as if they were mad about the yard, searching every corner and peeping under every tombstone. Poor Owney-na-peak endeavored as well as he could to hide himself, and began to thump his breast and cross himself, but it was all in vain, for one of the cats saw the long nose peeping from under the stone, and in a minute they dragged him, roaring and bawling, into the very middle of the churchyard, where they flew upon him altogether, and made smithereens of him from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet. The next morning, very early, young Owney came to the churchyard to see what had become of his cousin. He called over and over again upon his name, but there was no answer given. At last, entering the Palace of Tombs, he found his limbs scattered over the earth. "So that's the way it is with you, is it?" said he, clasping his hands and looking down on the bloody fragments. "Why then, though you were no great things in the way of kindness to me when your bones were together, that isn't the reason why I'd be glad to see them torn asunder this morning early." So gathering up all the pieces that he could find, he put them into a bag he had with him, and away with him to the well of Barrygowan, where he had lost no time in making a round and throwing them in, all in a heap. In an instant he saw Owney-na-peak as well as ever scrambling out of the well and helping him to get up. He asked him how he felt himself. "Oh, is it how I'd feel yourself you'd want to know?" said the other. "Easy, and I'll tell you. Take that for a specimen," giving him the same time a blow on the head, which you may say wasn't long in laying Owney sprawling on the ground. Then, without giving him a minute's time to recover, he thrust him into the very bag which he'd just been shaken himself, resolving within himself to drown him in the Shannon at once and to put an end to him forever. Growing weary by the day, he stopped at a shebeen house overright Robertstown Castle to refresh himself with a morning before he'd go any further. Poor Owney did not know what to do when he came to himself, if it might be rightly called coming to himself. The great bag tied up about him. His wicked cousin shot him down behind the door in the kitchen, and telling him he'd have his life surely if he stirred, he walked in to take something that's good in the little parlor. Owney could not for the life of him avoid cutting a hole in the bag, so to have a peep about the kitchen, and see whether he had no means of escape. He could see only one person, a simple-looking man who was counting his beads in the chimney corner, like prayer beads, and now and then striking his breast, and looking up as if he was praying greatly. "Lord," says he, "only give me death, and a favourable judgment. I haven't anybody now to look after, nor anybody to look after me. What's a few 10 pennies to save a man from want? Only a quiet grave is all I ask." Murther, says Owney to himself. "Here's a man that wants death and can't have it, and here I am going to have it, and in troth, I don't want it at all, see?" So after thinking a little what he had best do, he began to sing out very merrily, but lowering his voice for fear he should be heard in the next room where Owney-na-peak was. "To him that tied me here, be thanks and praises given. I'll bless him night and day for packing me to heaven. Of all the roads you'll name, he'll surely will not lag. Who takes his way to heaven by travelling in a bag?" To heaven! I'm not even going to try. It means you say, said the man in the chimney corner, opening his mouth and his eyes. "Why then, you'd be doing a Christian a turn if you'd take a neighbour with you that's tired of this bad and villainous world." Mood. You're a fool, said Owney. "I know I am. At least so the neighbours always tell me. But what hurt? Maybe I have a Christian soul as well as another, and fool or no fool, in a bag or out of a bag, I'd be glad and happy to go the same route it is you are talking of." After seeming to make a great favour of it, in order to allure him the more to the bargain, Owney agreed to put him into the bag instead of himself, and cautioning him against saying a word, he was just going to tie him, when he was touched with a little remorse for going to have the innocent man's life taken, and seeing a slip of a pig that was killed the day before in a corner hanging up, the thought struck him that he could do just as well as to put in the bag in their place. No sooner said than done. To the great surprise of the natural, he popped the pig into the bag and tied it up. "Now," says he, "to my good friend, go home, say nothing, but bless the name in heaven for saving your life. And you were as near losing it this morning as ever a man that didn't know." They left the house together. Presently out comes Owney-na-peak, very hearty, and being so, he was not able to perceive the difference in the contents of the bag. He's drunk. But hoisting it upon his back, he sallied out of the house. Before he'd gone far, he came to the rock of Foynes, and from the top of which he flung his burden into the salt waters. Away he went home and knocked at the door of the forge, which was opened to him by Owney. You may fancy him to yourself crossing and blessing himself over and over again when he saw, as he thought, the ghost standing before him. Remember, he thinks he killed him. But Owney looked very merry and told him not to be afraid. "You did many is the good turn in your life," says he, "but the equal of this never." So he up and told him that he'd found the finest place in the world at the bottom of the waters, and plenty of money. "See these 4 pieces for a specimen," showing him some he had taken from his own hiding hole. "What do you think of that for a story?" "Why, then, it's a droll one, no less. Sorrow bit if I wouldn't have a mind to try my luck in the same way. How'd you come home here before me that took the straight road and didn't stop for such as much as my gusta since I left Knockpatrick?" "Oh, there's a shortcut under the water," said Owney. "Mind and only be civil while you're in Tir-na-nog," which is a thing we talked about in a whole episode. So if you go back and look up the video about Irish Heaven, I think we did in January, we talked and told stories about Tir-na-nog. "And you'll make a sight of money." "Well," became Owney. He thrust his cousin into the bag and tied it about him, and putting it into a car, not car, like carriage, like a wagon, that was returning after leaving a load of oats at a corn store in the city, and it was not long before he was at Foynes again. Here he dismounted, and going to the rock, he was, I am afraid, half inclined to start his burden into the wide water, when he saw a small skiff making towards the point. He hailed her and learned that she was about to board a great vessel from foreign parts that was sailing out of the river. So he went with his bag on board, and making his bargain with the captain of the ship, he left Owney-na-peak along with the crew, and never was troubled with him after from that day to this. As he was passing by Barrygow and Well, he filled a bottle with water, and going home he bought a fine suit of clothes with the rest of the money he had buried, and away he set off in the morning to the city of Limerick. He walked through the town, admiring everything he saw, until he came before the palace of the king. Over the gates of this he saw a number of spikes with a head of a man stuck upon each, grinning in the sunshine. Not at all daunted, he knocked very boldly at the gate, which was opened by one of the guards of the palace. "Well, who are you, friend?" "I am a great doctor that's come from foreign parts to cure the king's eyesight. Lead me to his presence this minute." "Fair and softly," said the soldier. "Do you see all those heads that are stuck up there? Yours is very likely to be keeping company with them. If you are so foolish to come inside these walls, they are the heads of all the doctors in the land who came before you, and that's what makes the town so fine and healthy this time past. Praised be heaven for the same." "Don't be talking, you great gomerel," says Owney. "Only bring me to the king at once." He was brought before the king, and after being warned of his fate, if he should fail to do all that he undertook, the place was made clear of all but a few guards, and Owney was informed once more that if he should restore the king's eyes, he should wed the princess, and have the crown after her father's death. This put him in great spirits, and after making a round upon his bare knees about the bottle, he took a little of the water and rubbed it into the king's eyes, and in a minute he jumped from his throne and looked about him as well as ever. He ordered Owney to be dressed out like a king's son, and sent word to his daughter that he should receive him that instant for her husband. You may say to yourself that the princess, glad as she was of her father's recovery, did not like this message. Small blame to her when it is considered that she never set her eyes upon the man himself. However, her mind was changed wonderfully when he was brought out before her, covered with gold and diamonds and all sorts of grand things. Wishing, however, to know whether he had good a wit as he had a person, she told him that he should give her on the next morning an answer to 2 questions. Otherwise she would not hold him worthy of her hand. Owney bowed, and when she put the questions as follows: "What is that which is the sweetest thing in the world? And what are 3 most beautiful objects in creation?" These were puzzling questions, but Owney, having a small share of brains of his own, was not long in forming an opinion upon the matter. He was very impatient for the morning, but it came just as slow and regular as if he were not in the world. In a short time he was summoned to the courtyard where all the nobles of the land assembled, with flags waving and trumpets sounding, and all manner of glorious doings going on. The princess was placed on a throne of gold near her father, and there was a beautiful carpet spread for Owney to stand upon. Well, he answered her questions. After the trumpets were silenced, she put the first with a clear, sweet voice, and he replied, "It's salt," says he, very stout and out. There was great applause at that answer, and the princess owned, smiling, that he had judged right. "But now," said she, "for the second. What are the 3 most beautiful things in creation?" "Why," answered the young man, "here they are: a ship in full sail, a field of wheat in ear, and the third most beautiful thing was all the people didn't hear, but there was a great blushing and laughing among the ladies, and the princess smiled and nodded at him, quite pleased with his wit. Indeed, many said that the judges of the land themselves could not have answered better, had they been in Owney's place, nor could they be anywhere found more likely or well-spoken young men. He was brought first to the king, who took him in his arms and presented him to the princess. She could not help acknowledging to herself that his understanding was quite worthy of his handsome person. Orders being immediately given for their marriage to proceed, they were made one with all speed, and it is said that before another year came round, the fair princess was one of the most beautiful objects in creation. And there we go. That is the final story about cats. Like I said, cats are more a supporting character in that story. It's also a longer story, so I won't spend too much time because we're at the end of our time. I will say that the first time I read that story, I didn't really follow it. And I don't know what it was about how it was told, but it just didn't click with me. And I had a hard time even understanding what was going on. So if that happened to you, don't feel bad. That's how it was for me, and I was reading it, not having it read to me. Second time I read it, though, it made a lot more sense. And I've come to actually really like this story. It's surprisingly complex in its narrative and its cause and effect. While it does feel random at times, its characters are fairly consistent. And I guess you could argue a little bit flat. But in fairy tales, of course, the point is more so that people represent ideas or traits. And in this case, this was sort of brains versus brawn. And I think, as a story, I'd mentioned in the beginning that it was making specific reference to the Irish people being brutalized by British invaders. And I think there is something to be said that this story is a sort of reassurance that even if somebody comes with all the brutality and might of the British Empire, if you're clever and of a good soul, you'll make it. Whether that's true or not, whatever. But that, to me, is the comfort that a story like this would give, and I think the reason why it's being referenced in light of the famine and invasion. GS says cats are important there, clearly. I don't know. I could really only find 3 cat stories total. There might be more around. They're not insignificant. But I think any agrarian society, cats were relevant because cats killed mice, and mice were infested around anybody that grew grain. All right. Well, should you celebrate it, happy St. Patrick's Day to you. And if you missed it, I did do a little bit of an introduction where I talked about some of the stories that are associated to St. Patrick's Day. I did it very briefly, though, because there's lots of tellings of it. And instead, we chose to read about the cats, magical cats in Ireland. I mean, quite literally, magical cats in Ireland. I really like the way that they're characterized in here, but I'll also remind you of a fairly common theory around talking animals in stories, especially nations that were Christianized, but were formerly pagan, like Ireland. There's a pervasive theory that a lot of the talking animals were originally like forest spirits that may have even appeared as an animal. Like last week, I think it was, we talked about the fox in Ukrainian folktales and Swedish folktales and Scottish folktales and even Irish folktales and a couple of others. This fairly consistent fox character could very probably have been originally tales of a spirit that manifested as a fox in pagan beliefs that was later turned into just a random talking animal to deal with sort of Christian influence and missionaries that did not want things like forest spirits being taught. So it's entirely possible that the cats in these stories represent pagan spirits or gods that manifested as cats or something cat-like, and so over time in a Christianized area that was not friendly to that idea, that a lot of those stories got reinterpreted as talking cats. Hard to say. Yeah, Gia says happy St. Patrick's Day to all. Yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day to you. Now you know what it's about. It is not really a holiday about getting pissed drunk. Sorry to be the one to break that to you. But it's about an actual saint who was looked upon quite fondly and is a big figure in folklore in Ireland. But we talked about cats. We talked about the demon cats. If you want to follow us on Twitter or Instagram, at Varietal_lit, please like and subscribe if you actually like this. It really does help. I know that's really annoying. But I do want to say, just for a moment, that basically what decides whether YouTube is going to bury the video or give anybody else an opportunity to see it is engagement. It's an algorithm based on engagement. Engagement can be writing notes, comments, thumbs up, or subscribing. So the simplest thing you can do is click thumbs up. That really helps me. And beyond that, thank you so much for coming by to Fireside Fairytales. I'll keep the fire warm. I hope you get a good sleep. Take care of yourself.